This is a test of the captioning system. Our presentation will begin at the top of the hour at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all. Our presentation may begin.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, or I should say, buenas tardes. Have some people from the islands. I see people checking in. That's great. Thank you. Welcome to this session of the HUD CARES Act Virtual Training Conference 2022. This is one of two sessions today discussing the use of IDIS for CDBG-CV grantees. The first session earlier discussed activity setup and financial reporting. If you missed it, an instant recording will show up on this event site you're viewing on now within about 24 hours, I'm told. The official recording, along with transcript and slides, will of course be posted on the HUD Exchange, usually in about 2 to 3 weeks. This session is about reporting on the use of CDBG-CV grants and the use of CDBG for coronavirus prevention, preparation, and response, all using the caper in IDIS. Next slide. My name is Rob Strauntz. I'm with the Cloudburst Group. I'm glad to be here with two of my colleagues, John Coons. Hey, John.
Hey, Rob. Hello, everybody.
And Joel Warren. Hey, Joel.
Hey, Rob.
Also joined today by staff from HUD's Office of Block Grant Assistance, Robert Peterson and Puping Wang. Working Hi there, Robert. Working behind the scenes is our host and support staff from the CIDEM groups. Thanks, everybody. So on to housekeeping. Before we start, a few things to go over. This webinar is scheduled to end. Oh, that's the wrong time. It's scheduled about 2 hours, but we may not. We may end before that, but we'll have plenty of time at the end to take questions. It will be recorded, so if you have to step away, that's okay. You can catch up later. And again, everything will be available on the HUD Exchange eventually. Everyone is in listen-only mode and will stay in listen-only for the duration of the session. There are in the website here, you can see there's some live captions going on there. So if you get tired of our voices, you can just read it. You can toggle that on and off if it bothers you. And also, you should have gotten an attendee guide. Has a lot of resources and information about the platform and how the folks at CIDEM are running this. On to questions. We have plenty of time today at the end of our presentation to answer your questions. We hope to answer as many as we can. Please do use the Q&A feature of the web page to enter your questions. If you need help, you can jump into the chat and ask the host, but we'll be minding the Q&A for questions on the topic. Feel free to enter them as you have them. I'll be grabbing them and sharing them with the presenters so they can be looking them over and answering them. If we're not able to get to your question today, or if it's a real sort of deep dive individual circumstances question, please do take advantage of HUD Exchange Ask a Question. I'll be saying that again and again because we can reach out to you, get you on the phone, look at what's going on in IDIS and help you out. Now about chat, as I mentioned, if you're having technical difficulties, please use the chat feature and ask the folks for help there. Our host will be keeping an eye on it. You can also send an email to eventsupport@cidemgroup.com. That's on the slide there. Please don't use that chat for questions to us. We will not be paying attention to it, but the hosts will. A little bit about Slido. This cool little Q&A engagement feature here. If you want to view and participate in the Q&A in a separate window, a browser window or a mobile device, you can navigate your browser on over to sli.do, so sli.do, and a new browser window, or install the Slido app on your mobile device. You can find the appropriate code at the bottom of the page in the session description, and that is right there on the slide, 068274. Session objectives. Okay, today we have 4 key objectives. One, that you're going to understand where and how to report your progress in responding to coronavirus and its impact on the CDBG, other CPD programs, pardon me. We'll talk about how the CR05 and CR10 screens capture your activity level accomplishments data and roll that up into the CAPR. We'll go through a few options for reporting accomplishment data in the CAPR, more on that later. And also point you to some useful IDIS reports that provide financial and accomplishment data specific to the use of CARES Act fund and using CDBG to respond to COVID-19. All right, agenda. One last slide, I promise. Okay, so we're starting with the soup, an overview of CAPR and IDIS, econ planning. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot today, and then have a refreshing salad of general CAPR guidelines. Dive into the entree about some specific screen by screen instructions. We'll go to the cheese plate of IDIS reports, and then finally to the dessert of help or resources, and retire to the salon to take some questions at the very end. Okay, John, I guess I'm hungry. It's your turn now. Thanks.
Well, now I'm hungry, Rob. Thanks, Rob. All right, so state and entitlement grantees use the CAPR to report progress and challenges in meeting their annual action plan objectives and their 5-year strategic plan objectives across all of your formula grant programs, your formula CPD programs. While the CAPER combines reporting on all these programs, just keep in mind each program has its own unique requirements and guidance. Today we have a fairly narrow focus. We're looking at how to report on your response to the coronavirus using CDBG-CV funds and regular CDBG funds in the CAPER. So our disclaimer for today's session is that our guidance supplements rather than replaces your overall reporting processes and your guidance on your regular formula and other CARES Act programs. Last year, many grantees took advantage of an extension of the CAPER deadline. However, that extension provided by HUD applies only to the 2019 program year CAPER and does not extend to the 2020 CAPER. So we need to be timely. All right, let's stop for a quick fun CAPER fact. So while the CAPER flower is a perennial, the CAPER submission, as in the Consolidated Annual Progress and Evaluation Report, is an annual. So this means you report on progress made during the specific reporting year for both your formula grant and your CDBG-CV programs. However, there's just one thing to keep in mind on the financial compliance of your CDBG-CV grant compared to your regular CDBG grant. The CDBG-CV grant is treated as a single grant, and therefore complying with the admin camp, as an example, is based on the life of the grant as opposed to the regular CDBG that looks at expenditures and obligation on a year-to-year basis. I think that may have been covered a bit in the prior session. As you recall, the first CARES Act funds were released in the spring of 2020 in response to those sudden economic and social hardships, all these communities were facing, all of you were facing. To get these funds out as quickly as possible, HUD provided flexibility and streamlined the annual action plan amendment process. One key streamlining action was to require a consolidated plan amendment, although some grantees chose to do so anyway. As a result, grantees set up their goals and projects related to their CDBG-CV funds in a variety of ways. Grantees could add new CDBG-CV specific goals. If they also amended their consolidated plan, they could add projects that are associated with existing goals, or they could even just add projects without associating them with a goal. And even if you amended your con plan to include the CDBG-CV goal back in 2020, you now may be in a new consolidated plan cycle that no longer includes, those original CV goals. This variation is important because the structure of the goals and projects determine what IDIS activities data gets pulled forward into the goals and outcome screen, the 05 screen. For these variations in how your CDBG-CV projects and activities align with your goals, your action plans, consolidated plans, open some questions for many of you, I'm sure, about how to report your performance on the CAPER. However, HUD has provided some flexibility and guidance for the CAPER reporting to accommodate the flexibility granted in the CARES Act Action Plan Amendment. So bottom line, it will be fine, and we'll provide some guidance today on integrating your CDBG-CV reporting into your CAPER. All right, I recognize we're at the end of the afternoon, especially for those on the East Coast, of course, and hopefully you've been able to take advantage of some of the other CARES Act sessions. I know there was a pretty intensive one just before this. So even if you're feeling a little overloaded today, we hope you keep in mind two fundamental key takeaways. First, it is important to report progress made with your CDBG-CV programs and in your response to preparing, preventing, and responding to the coronavirus. This will take place mostly on the 05 screen. Second, report on the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on your formula CPD programs and on high priority community needs. Now, let's talk about where and how to report the CDBG-CV funds and the impact of coronavirus in the Econ Planning Suite's CAPER template, which you're seeing in front of you now, at least a part of it. I think there's been some new screens added this year that aren't there, but today we're covering 5 screens that can be used to report on the CDBG-CV progress. The CR05 goals and outcome screens and the CR45 screens are the 2 critical ones, at least for today. You should also update your other screens as appropriate. For instance, if your CDBG-CV activities address homelessness or affordable housing goals, you may update the CR20 or CR25 screens. In any case, we're going to focus on the 5 highlighted screens and mostly on the CR05 screen. Before we get into some of those later screens, let's just take a quick stop at the administration screen, which is primarily used to upload supporting documents, submitting your CAPER, and of course, initially to create your CAPER. We'll just briefly touch on this screen. The CDBG grantee, so one just quick thing here, the CDBG grantees will load the financial summary reports that show compliance with certain program requirements. So entitlements now must upload 3 financial reports rather than the 2 you may have done in the past, including the PR26 CDBG-CV financial summary report. We won't get into details about that here because I know the previous CDBG-CV IDIS session that some of you probably were just on covered that, and that will be posted online as well. And I know that session covered the PR26 CDBG-CV report as well as the cash on hand report, which is another thing that many CDBG grantees are interested in. For states, they need only upload the same PR 2018 report as they typically do, as that already includes the setup to include the CDBG-CV grant. Okay, next. All right, now let's turn to the CR05 goals and outcomes screen. All right, this is the big screen. So this CR05 goals and outcomes screen, it is the heart of the CAPER. It allows you to share how well your community is doing in reaching the goals your community set in your annual action plan, as well as your 5-year strategic plan. It is also the main screen. You will tell your story of the progress made in implementing your CDBG-CV programs and any challenges that you have to overcome. The screen, let's look at the organization a little. The screen contains 2 tables and 2 narrative prompts to share your efforts in reaching these goals. There's table 1 that talks about that includes accomplishments for the program year, and table 2 that looks at the accomplishments for the strategic plan to date. So your first is the action plan, second is the consolidated plan. These tables are designed to pull data from the IDIS activities that you've entered throughout the year and compare actual accomplishment data with the expected outcomes you included in your annual action plan and con plan goals. The 2 narrative fields are located just at the very top, number 1, and right near the bottom at number 5 there. In addition to responding specifically to the questions, to the prompts that you see there, you can also be used to supplement or explain the data you entered in the tables. And there's some intricacies as we get into combining CDBG and CDBG-CV data. The screen also contains an option to add images, text boxes, and tables, which Joel will cover a little bit later as well. each year, when a grantee creates the CAPER template in the Econ Planning Suite, IDIS takes a snapshot of your IDIS data. And it pulls the accomplishments and beneficiary data reported in the activity accomplishment screens, as well as any financial data accumulated over the years as you funded and drew down against activities. The C05 tables, the table number 1 and 2, then organize the IDIS activity data, level data, by goals that were created in the action plan and the con plan. And the IDIS project links the IDIS activities back to the action plan goals. So just understanding a little bit of the structure is helpful when we get into dealing with CDBG and CV accomplishment data. Because of the need in the spring of 2020 to allow grantees to quickly amend their action plans and get the funds in the street, there are some complexities and nuances we need to address for the reporting of your CDBG-CV progress now. The data tables may or may not fully collect and organize the IDIS data when reporting CDBG-CV accomplishments as you're used to. This is primarily because of the many ways in which projects can be set up in the action plan, which Joel's going to go over again shortly. The key point is that you can use a combination of the C04 data tables, 15 data tables, which are editable, the custom tables, and the narratives to tell your CDBG-CV story. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joel to talk about how to use the combination of tables and narrative prompts to report accomplishments, regardless of the way you set up your projects in the action plan. Joel?
Hey, John. Thanks for that. I think Rob said that was the salad portion. We're going to move into Taco Tuesday entree. So as John mentioned, in the spirit of getting these funds out to the community to address everything you're experiencing, there was lots of flexibility for how you set up the stuff in Econ Planning Suite. So we kind of went ahead and we laid out these 4 scenarios, which covers all the ways you could have set them up. So I'm going to walk through these 4 scenarios. It's kind of a slog, but we're going to go through each one, and then it'll give you an idea of how this will look in the CAPER, in the CR05 screen particularly, once you get there. And then we'll talk a little bit about what you can do with each scenario and how to show your data, and how to tell your story given your scenario. Okay, so first up, scenario 1. In the case you created this specific CV goal, and this is where you have just CV projects pointing to that single CV goal. So to have this, you would have had to amend your con plan to include that CV goal, and then that gets included into your action plan too. So you'll see here in that annual goal supported box, this is found in that AP35 project screen. So when you're setting up that project, you'll see this annual goal supported box, and you would have had to click just the single CV goal, and that kind of sets up that data structure in the system. So all the activities behind that project would then just point to that single goal. So this is probably the cleanest and simplest approach for showing CV data in the CR05. And then again, you would have had to amend your con plan and your action plan to include that. So you can have more than one CV project, as this picture shows, and that's not a problem. So you can have as many projects as you want. The key part here is that it's just CV projects pointing to that single CV goal. Okay, so what does this look like? So if you're in scenario 1 and you make your CAPER, IDIS will combine all that accomplishment data for all those CV projects, and it will point it just to that single goal in the CR05 table. So again, kind of like what John said, you can always update this data in the CR05 as you need to. But if you set your goals and projects up this way, that CV project data will point back to that CV goal. And with all of these, so that bottom box here, how to report. So as I said, you can always manually update the numbers in the actual column. But then, as you'll see with almost all these scenarios, we'll definitely encourage you to use those narrative fields to offer some extra context of the progress you're making with your CV projects and goals. Okay, so scenario 2, this is when you created a CV project and it's not associated to any goal in the action plan. So you'll notice here that annual goals supported box that nothing's checked. Again, that box is in the AP 35, which is the project screen. So you go there to find out exactly what scenario you're in. The catch with this one is, as you know, we're getting further and further away from your 19 actual funding for CV, and you have your CV projects. The further we get away from that action plan, no matter how you set up your CV projects, the CAPER only looks at your current con plan cycle. So once you get beyond your current con plan cycle, your CV projects will act as though they're in this scenario. So a good example, if your con plan cycle is, say, 2015 to 2019, and your CV funds and projects are all within that 19 action plan, when you're working on, say, your 2020 or 2021 CAPER, so you're in your next con plan cycle, all those CV projects will be handled as if it's this scenario, because your CAPER is only looking at your current con plan cycle. So to report on this, you will see no data will be carried over into the CR05. So there'll be nothing in that actual column that reflects any project that's not associated to a goal, or that goal is in a previous con plan cycle. So to report on this, your best option here is to use the narrative fields as always to talk about what you're up to, your accomplishment outcomes, offer some context to the data in there. And then another way you can report the actual numbers themselves. So at the very bottom of the CR05, like John mentioned, there's that add table button. You can click that button, and I'll go through this a little bit more detail later, but it kind of mimics a little Excel sheet. You could plug in your own data there and then upload your CV accomplishments that aren't being pulled through into the CR05 screen. I know this is a lot, so I'll do a recap after we walk through these 4, and feel free to ask questions and we can answer them as they come. Okay, so almost halfway. Scenario 3, this is when you have regular CDBG projects and CV projects, both pointing to a single goal. So you'll see again that annual goal supported box, it's a single goal is checked. The catch here is you're going to have CV accomplishment and annual CDBG accomplishments bubbling up into the CR05 that are combined. So if you wanted to pull them apart, tell your story, you could do that. We can go into that a little later. But just know, if you have CV projects and annual projects linked to a single goal, IDIS will combine those together in the CR05 screen. Okay, so if this is where you are, if you're in scenario 3, if this is you, just know that IDIS will combine those outcome data elements into the CR05 in the actual column. And then here are 2 kind of solutions that we think are reasonable. So you're always welcome to update the actual column as you see fit. Some grantees might pull things apart. You're welcome to leave those accomplishments together and then use the narrative fields to describe and offer some extra context about both your CV and your CDBG accomplishments towards that goal. Option 2 here, which would require a lot more data validation work on your side, is you could pull apart that data if you'd like to, and then use the narrative fields to describe just your CV accomplishment data, offer the context, or again, you could go into that add table feature and you could plug in your CV accomplishments there and leave the CDBG annual accomplishments up in the CR05. So that was a lot. So just to kind of recap, your options here, if this is you, if you're combining CV and annual together. You can leave the data alone as it populates there in the actual column, and then use the narrative fields to describe. You can pull them apart and edit the actual column as you see fit, and then still use those narrative fields to offer the context and kind of round out that data. Okay. So on to the last scenario. This is when you have a CD project pointing to more than one goal. So again, looking at that annual goals supported box, we have 2 goals checked in this case. So IDIS doesn't know exactly where you're wanting to put that data. So it essentially just won't populate that data into the CR05 screen for you. So it's kind of like as if this project is not tied to a goal because it's tied to more than one. And IDIS just won't choose for you. So if that's you, if you're tying projects to more than one goal, the activity data there won't bubble up to the CR05 in that actual column. If that's your case, you're reporting similar to what you've seen in the other scenarios. Use those accomplishment narrative fields in the CR05 to talk about everything you've been up to for the last program year. If you'd like to include data, there's no way you can add a row itself to the CR05 tables, but you can always add that custom table. So at the bottom of the screen there, you'll see that add table button. You could click that and kind of plug in your own data and save that. And that'll be attached to the screen for both HUD to review. And when you print the document too, that customized table will show up for you. Okay, so a quick recap of all of these. So scenario 1, you have that CV specific goal and all their, 1 or more projects can be attached to that goal. But really the catch here is it's a single goal being associated to 1 or more projects. If that's your case, then your data will bubble up as long as you're in the same con-plan cycle. Scenario 2, so this is where you have a CV project and it's not attached to any goal at all. So if that's the case, no data will come through in the CR05 for you, and you'll have to manually update the actual columns if that's an option. You can include your custom table, make sure you're using those narrative boxes too. Just as a reminder, so that scenario 2, as we get further away from the 19 action plan, if you're in your next con plan cycle, this is the one that will apply to you. So even though you might have a CD project that's associated to a single goal, if it's in your last con plan cycle, it's going to be scenario 2. So you're not going to have that CV data bubbling up into the CR05 once you get into the next con plan cycle. Okay, so scenario 3 is a little recap. If you have CV and annual CDBG combined to a single goal, your options are, you can leave the data alone and just know that it's combined and maybe use the narrative fields to describe that and offer some context. Or you could pull those things apart and report on just CDBG data in the tables and then use your custom table. You have options there with scenario 3. And then in scenario 4, this is when it's with more than one goal. So this is really similar again to scenario 2. So the system just won't populate data for you. You'll have to choose where it wants to go. So because you chose more than one goal, it doesn't know. So you could just use the narrative fields. You could use that custom table to populate that data there too. Okay, so we've made it through the scenarios. Feel free to ask questions. We'll get to those at the end. So just a quick recap. We've already seen this screen. John kind of walked through, but we just wanted to reiterate. So no matter what scenario you're in, 1, 2, 3, or 4, these are the places where you can tell your story on the CR05. So it's a mix of data and narrative. You can customize tables. You can add JPEGs. You can, if you run out of space, describing CV and regular CDBG accomplishment with narrative, you can hit that add text button. That'll give you an extra text box. to include on the screen. But in any case, no matter what scenario you're in, these are your 5 places to choose from in the CR05. So I wanted to go over this a little bit because we kind of emphasize the whole add table feature. I don't know how many grantees are super familiar with it. There is one thing at least to show. So once you hit that button, it'll create a pop-up. So if you hit it and you don't see it, make sure you have a pop-up blocker off, or you might get a notification to allow pop-ups. So that might be one thing. If you click it and you don't see it, understand if it's a pop-up box. It's not like another screen or anything like that. You have to label it. So make sure you label it something that you're comfortable with HUD seeing. And finally, you have to hit save. And I think one thing that catches some grantees are if you do allow pop-ups, sometimes the box is very small and you might only see like the first 3 columns, the first like 5 rows of the box. You don't see the whole box. So you won't see that save button. So make sure if you're going this route of adding a custom table, that you make the pop-up dialog box big enough to where you can see the save button at the bottom. So you could add all these rows you wanted to. You might need to make it bigger to see that save button. And you'll see too, so you can't make these rows and columns bigger or smaller. This text, the box you're seeing on the screen now is just how big it is. So if you would prefer to upload a formatted table, you can do a picture of that. So if you have an Excel sheet, you can kind of mimic this or mimic the CR05 a little bit. You can take a screenshot of that and then upload that. And that would be, so the add JPEG, it'd be the same style of thing. You'd search for the file, for the JPEG, give it a name, and then hit save. And then one last thing about these. So when you do all that work, you might not see this on your screen right away. So you would hit save for the dialog pop-up box or for your JPEG. You would hit save, and then you're just brought back to the CR05 screen. Make sure you hit save or save and return on the CR05, and then you'll see that populate. So here, you'll notice I called this the CDBG-CV accomplishments table. I hit save, and then we would go to the next slide here. I would be taken back to the CR05. I would hit save, and there it would populate. You see CDBG-CV accomplishments as a table at the very bottom of the screen. I think that's it for me. John, want to talk about the narrative boxes?
Yeah, and I would say, Joel, we're really deep in the main course here. I'm not sure where you're
Indeed.
following Rob's course there, but we're pretty deep into it here. Thank you. All right, so now let's talk about the 2 prompts on the CR05 screen. Now that Joel's covered the tables, CR05 tables, and how to add custom tables. And so we kind of want to look at these narratives from the perspective of CDBG-CV and coronavirus response reporting. So again, we're just kind of taking our narrow view of how to deal with the coronavirus and CDBG-CV funds here. Excuse me. The first prompt is the progress the jurisdiction has made in carrying out its strategic plan and its action plan. The narrative can be used for a variety of things. So you could discuss progress in meeting goals addressing the pandemic using both the regular CDBG and the CARES Act funds, and to provide just additional context of progress in implementing the CDBG-CV activities. So again, the CR05, it does cover many programs that you may receive. You certainly want to focus on addressing over all the accomplishments and the goals you're set forth in your action plan and comp plan, but you can also focus in a little bit here on the CDBG-CV activities. So for instance, you can highlight your major initiatives and accomplishments in preparing, and responding to the coronavirus. Or you can provide a status update on major initiatives. So are certain activities that were delayed by labor or supply shortages now scheduled to proceed in the spring? The prompt could also be useful, especially if you do not have specific CDBG-CV goals in your action plan, to provide context on the accomplishment data in the CR05 tables 1 and 2, or any supplemental tables that were added. So again, you had a few options for how you present the data, and I think this could be a way just to make sure, as folks are reading the con plan, that you're setting something up, especially if you just put a table down below. If your CR05 tables do not include the CR05 data, so you may really note that the CDBG-CV performance data is included in that custom table. Another note, just because of the character limits of the narrative prompts, we'd really encourage you to insert a custom data table below rather than to enter in a bunch of tabular data here that the field doesn't really set up to do as much, these narrative fields in the system. Okay, you can use the second CR05 narrative prompt to address 2 different areas related to the pandemic and CARES Act funding. The pandemic, it really did impact grantees, many of your ability to use the formula funds designated for high priority activities in the original con plan or action plan. You can discuss the impact of the coronavirus on your formula grant program specific objectives that were identified in your action plan here. There's also another opportunity in the CR45 screen to talk about the pandemic's impact on your programs. But for here, you may also address how CDBG-CV funds were used to meet any objectives set forth in your annual action plan amendment. So even if you did add CDBG specific goals. And this pretty much completes our discussion of CR05 screen, although we will later talk about how some of the reports can help complete the data sets. And as a wrap up, just remember that it's important that you do report on accomplishments of your CDBG-CV funds on the CR5 screen. You should be able to successfully do this by using just a combination of data tables and narratives based on how you set up your goals and projects in IDIS, as Joel described. And Joel, can you take us to the next screen?
Hey, John, you bet. All right, so we made it through CR05 completely. Thanks, John, for wrapping it up. The CR10, so the racial and ethnic composition of persons, households, families assisted. This is a much simpler screen than the CR05, thankfully. So this bypasses really that entire goal project relationship. This screen is really only looking at the IDIS activity accomplishment data that you have in the system. So this is pulling data for each activity, bundling it for you despite project goal relationship, and it goes into the screen. Things to keep in mind though, so it does combine CDBG and CV accomplishments in that first CDBG column. So in that first column, that's going to be your CV plus annual for that program year. Other thing to keep in mind, use reports, I guess next slide, use reports to help validate this data. John will go into some of those helpful ones later. Use the narrative fields to discuss the beneficiaries. All the numbers here can be edited. So one thing to note also is that you'll notice the categories here don't always reflect what's possible in IDIS on the activities side of things. So if you want to upload a custom table, kind of like how we talked about before, it'd be the same process. So if you wanted to report on more categories of race and ethnicity, you could do that. You could either add a JPEG of a formatted table by yourself. You could add a text box there to talk about it more, or you can add that custom table. Same process as last time. Make sure you give it a name, make the pop-up box bigger so you can see that save button. Then when you're back to the CR10, after you hit save, just hit save or save and return on the CR10 itself, so you save your work. Okay, that's all for there. So in the home stretch here of screens, just two more. So the CR15 is the resources and investment screen. Getting into it, this is also fairly straightforward. The source of funds column is directly associated to what you had in the AP15 of whatever program year you're in. So if you're doing your 2020 caper, this will reflect that AP15 resource screen of your 2020 action plan. Same then is true for 2021 caper. It'll be the 2021 action plan. The one thing that will be different as you get further away from that 19 action plan. So you see an other column or other row there at the bottom. That other row is just reflective of whatever you put in your AP15 screen as other. So in your 19 action plan, if you have other CDBG-CV, that would populate in your 19 caper as this. You would see other, and you would put in your CDBG-CV data. Once you get into the 2020 caper and 2021, you won't have that row of other. So you'll have to use narrative fields to describe that CDBG-CV resources available. Or if you have other funds, so if you put in state funds or if you put in other federal funds you receive, whatever is in the AP15 screen is reflected here. So that, just to reiterate, that resources made available column is taken directly from your AP15. And then this is the total amount of funding made available for that program year. And there's that last column, which is the expenditure data. This is generated by the system based on the drawdowns completed for that particular program year. So 19 would be 19 program year, your 2020 caper, you're looking at your 2020 expenditures. And in both of these cases, both numbers can be edited. So both columns, if you want to edit, update, you should feel free to do that. Okay, that's it for me, John. Covered beneficiary data, we covered resources and investments. What do you got next?
Well, thanks, Joel. We have the CR45 screen. So we're going to look at the screen that really specifically focuses on just CDBG. All right, and there's only one narrative prompt here we'll be dealing with. Like the second 05 narrative we discussed earlier, this prompt here in the CR45 provides an opportunity to recognize the impact of the coronavirus. So some grantees' capacity to carry out planned programs may have been impacted during the program year. Priorities may have changed. Other funding sources may have crowded out the need for CDBG or CDBG-CV funding. And generally the needs of the community may have evolved since earlier in the pandemic. So therefore, you may use this narrative field to talk about a few things. Any goals from the strategic plan or annual action plan that were not met due to the pausing, reducing, or discontinuing non-CV related activities. Changes made to priorities and objectives in responding to the coronavirus. Could be changes made to your CDBG-CV funded programs or changes made to CDBG funded programs due to the pandemic and the impact of that. And that really completes a review of some of the critical caper screens for CDBG-CV reporting in the IDIS template. Joel? Actually, it's me still. All right, so now we're going to switch over just to talk about reports for a little while, which are helpful, to, really for you to calculate, preview, and verify financial and accomplishment data in the system, both before and before you create your template and after. And so we're not going to cover everything here, but we want to highlight a few that may be important for CDBG-CV. So fortunately, IDIS reports have been updated to accommodate the coronavirus response and the use of CDBG-CV funds and other CARES Act funding for that matter. Many reports can be specifically run for either CDBG or CDBG-CV or for both combined. You can select options when running a report. They may look like the top image or variations of that. So there's a few different places depending on the report you're running. As you move down, as you're about to submit it, you'll get a few different looks, but fundamentally, many of them work the same. The financial reports are typically based on the grant funding. So were the activities funded by your formula CDBG grant or your CDBG-CV grant? So things like the PR07 or PR05 for those of you who look at the transactional information, etc. Many of the accomplishment reports can be run by, or at least indicate whether activities were used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to coronavirus. This is based on your response to the questions shown at the bottom of the screen. So, important one, critical one to answer yes or no. Is this activity to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus? So the reports will often include activities for which the grantee answered yes to this question, even if funded with regular CDBG funds. So even if you use regular CDBG funds, but your activity responds to the coronavirus and you indicated here so, that will impact the various accomplishment reports. All right, we'll just be pretty quick here. These are just the required reports for the CDBG program. Again, mentioned this earlier, but every year, entitlement grantees are familiar with adding their PR26 and CDBG financial summary report. And as of a few years ago, the CDBG activity by selected grant, which came upon us after grant-based accounting was introduced. And now grantees should also upload the PR26 CDBG-CV financial summary report. So again, there's two reports. They really look at the different funding sources because you're really confirming that you're in compliance with various financial caps and timeliness requirements, etc. And then states, as I mentioned earlier, you'll use that same PR28, the grant financial summary report, and maybe some of the other PR28 reports that you're used to for both the CDBG and CV program. All right, now that we've looked at those required reports, and again, the previous session right before ours did look at some of those reports more closely. And so if you weren't able to participate in that, I encourage you to look at the resources available and where to find that afterwards, which I believe Rob will cover at the end of today's session. So now we'll turn to a few helpful reports to use when preparing for the CAFR. So you may be familiar with the Consolidated Plan Goals and Accomplishment Report. The report contains most of the information on the expected and actual outcomes that are included in the CR5 Tables 1 and Table 2. So this looks a little familiar, probably. The report's broken into 3 sections based on how activities and projects are linked to goals. The first section is the accomplishments associated with a single strategic plan goal. The second, accomplishments associated with more than one strategic goal. And the third section is accomplishments not associated with a single strategic plan goal. And we're going to get into a little bit of a crosswalk in a moment. But just to remind you, a best practice is to run the report before creating your caper to help make sure you understand how the CR5 screen is going to capture your IDIS data. So remember, when you actually create the template, again, it creates a snapshot or takes a snapshot of your data at that point and pulls it into the CR5. So this report is very helpful to kind of look ahead of time and how it's going to play out once you create the template. And it will help you verify, this data and make any adjustments to IDIS activities and projects if needed, really both before you run the template or if you make additional changes after that time. And one note, Joe, can you just go back for just one moment to the previous? So just a note that the second two sections, it doesn't show it on this particular one for the second section, but in the third, you will see there's a CARES Act kind of flag there. So it's helpful if you want to look at this report as well as others on identifying a little bit of the information on which activities or projects you might need to look more deeply into to associate them with the proper goal. All right, thanks, Joel. Move on. All right, so these sections do align with the 4 scenarios that you establish in your CDBG-CV goals and projects. So these are the scenarios that we looked at earlier that Joel took you through. So that first section of the report, the comp plan goals report, deals with accomplishments associated with a single strategic plan goal. So you should find accomplishments related to CV projects that are associated with a single CDBG-CV goals in there, as well as those CV projects that are associated with a single CDBG goal. So that's, again, you may be either isolating your CV projects in a single goal, or you may be tying them along with some regular CDBG projects to a general CDBG goal that you had previously established. So this really relates to scenario 1 and 3 that Joel went over earlier. And then where the reports particularly may be helpful are those of you that have accomplishments or set up your projects either associated with multiple goals, as in scenario 4, or you did not set up projects, or your projects did not associate with any of the goals, as in scenario 2. So again, it's a way to help identify some of the projects and their associated accomplishments that you may need to do some additional work to make sure you're reporting them in the system. And so now really going to go a little bit, just touch on a couple of these other reports. So there was a particular report that I think was created really for the CDBG-CV program. Maybe it was around for that old CDBGR program, for those of you who've been around for a while. But again, some of these reports, these particular ones are really good for looking at summary database matrix code, which a lot of times do end up being aligned with the goal. So it could be a helpful one for looking more precisely at goals or matrix codes which represent the eligible project types or eligible activity types. So the PR50 report includes disbursement information, and the PR51 report includes accomplishment data. So there's 2 different reports with slightly different purposes. All right, so here are two of my favorite, two terrific reports that if you really want to start drilling into activity level data, which can easily be downloaded into Excel. And then in Excel, you can filter and kind of calculate or verify a lot of the CDBG-CV data. So some of you like to sort of make sure you can build from the ground up. I particularly use the PRO3 report anytime I do a caper to the BOSMAC version of that, which can pull it down into Excel to really be able to make sure I have a clear understanding of every activity. And then I could either use some of the more summary reports to get the information, or I can just use filters and subtotals and so on to feel good about what the data shows. So one note, the PRO2 CDBG CARES Act activity detail report, that's a great report that was developed really for the CARES Act program. So it's a little different than the general PRO2 report many of you may use that covers all programs, and it does include those outcomes and financial status. The PRO3 report, both the long version that's more narrative, it comes as a PDF, and the BOSMAC version does, provide that detailed accomplishment and financial information on each activity for the specific program year that you run the program. So again, it ties in well to the CAPER, which reports against a specific program year. And then again, you can also look more deeply if you want on some of the beneficiary data to check it out with the CR10 screen that Joel used earlier. And then I know there's many other reports. We're not going to run into them now. I know the previous session probably looked at, such as the PRO5, PRO7 reports that show transaction materials, information that can be aligned with some of these other reports. But I think we want to cut that discussion there so we have time for questions. Rob, I think you're up now.
I am. And so we've been logging your questions. So thanks for submitting all those. And we've been grabbing them, and we'll begin to answer them verbally as Joel and John catch their breath here. And I'm just going to drop in links into the chat, links for these. Oh, look at them all there. Okay. And these are so behind these, the slides will have active link to the PDF that goes up. Let's see. Did you all want to go and grab your own questions? Do you want me to read these out?
Let's see. I can read. I don't see any on Slido, Rob.
No, I've been putting them in our Google Sheet. Yep.
Oh, awesome. Okay, yeah, I'll just take them. So the first one
All
I
right.
see is character limits can make some of the scenarios difficult by using only narrative. How do we get around that? So true, the character limit is about 4,000 characters in those text boxes. And when you start to put in bullets or italics or bold letters, it really captures a lot of those characters. There's a lot of hidden characters behind formatting. So if you need to say more, you should definitely use that add text box. That'll give you 4,000 more characters to deal with. If you're just working with data, feel free to use that add table feature. If you already have an Excel sheet and you just kind of want to plug in a picture of it, you should feel comfortable to use that add JPEG. If you're in a larger text box, like in the CR45, you'll see that little icon that is like a Microsoft Word icon. If you click that in those text boxes, you'll get 4,000 more characters there too. It functions just like the add text feature. That should do it though. Those are your best options. Add JPEG, add text, or add table.
All right, thanks, Joel.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got a question here about so some of the sessions today had slides posted in the website. I'm not sure why some did and some didn't. Other than I think we were working on ours up to the 11th hour. But the sort of an instant recording of this will be available pretty soon, I think within 24 hours. And then the official recording and slide deck and transcript will all be on the HUD Exchange. We say 2 to 3 weeks. It's often sooner. So sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'll take one, John. So I see one about home consortium. Are there any changes in the CAPER to report CDBG and CDBG-CV if we are part of a home consortium? And that answer is no. This CAPER and the CAPERs in the future will function the exact same for CV as they have for CDBG, whether you're part of a home consortium or not. So you're responsible for your own CAPER as part of the home consortium. You might be familiar with like the action plan or the con plan templates where the lead entity has to create those. Not the case for the CAPER. You can just make your own and complete it like you always have in the past. John, I think I see one. Can kind of just reiterate. The question is, what are the required reports that must be submitted with the CAPER? I can go back to that slide.
Yeah, so again, there are really only a few. Again, we're just talking about CDBG here. Other programs may have other required reports, but it's the PR, the various financial summary reports. So the 3 of these that are shown on the screen for the entitlements and the one for the states. Now I know some grantees do like to put up, or maybe even their field office requests it, add their PRO3 report that gives a lot of details on it, but these are the ones that are required. The focus of the CAPER really is to look at the progress made against goals. So when the Econ Planning Suite was developed, sort of the emphasis became how are you doing in a broad way of meeting the goals you identified in your plan, and not getting into as many of the specific reports, because a lot of that information from the other reports that you may have done in the past really are captured in the screens themselves. And so that's there. And of course, if your field office or others, well, your field office wants to get details, information, they can of course always download the reports themselves. They have access to your data as well. And I do invite, if we get into any of these, Robert and Puping, if you have anything you want to add anywhere or stress, please do feel free to jump in.
Thank you. I would add on the state CDBG program, in terms of the required reports to be attached to the CAPER, generally referred to as the state PER. I encourage states to review CPD notice 2111. Really, there's a new report that's included with the PR28 family of reports for the annual program. That financial summary report rolls up the annual grant and program income. And then we do have a new grant specific report for CV that is a separate report in the PR28 folder that breaks out just the grant and also what's spent for CV funds. And that can be run as well for your other year's funds, especially for 19 and 20. There was a waiver related to the public service cap for those years if those funds were being spent in tie back to coronavirus. So the way to account for that is to run that grant specific report to show how much of your public service expenditures had coronavirus tieback. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And I know, Robert, you're particularly have expertise in a lot of things, but the state program as well. So we'll take advantage of that. Joel, do you see any questions you'd like to answer?
Yeah, I do. Let's see. So I have one here about the CR15. Let me go back to that slide. So the question is, can you just repeat again about the CR15 and how the other row functions? Do we have to use this for CV, or can we just use the narrative? So the source of funds column, that's not an editable column. That will just look at what you have in your action plan for that program year. So for example, if you have your CV funds in 2019 and you're working on your 2020 caper, you won't have that other row, and you also can't even add it. So there's no way to add a row. So if you are in your 2020 caper, or really in any caper that's not the program year that you have your CV funds in, you won't have access to this other row. So then just use the narrative to describe the CV funds.
Joel, while you've got this up, can you go over to the scenario number 3?
Sure.
So I see one question. I'm looking in IDIS, although we did not. I'm sorry. Where was it? It's about where. Oh, here we go. Where can I find information on how to input scenario 3 in IDIS combining CDBG and CDBG-CV? So just generally, and then I'll let you go in a little bit deeper. So these slides and will be available after the session. I believe they'll be posted. I don't know the exact timing, but Rob may know that. And there is a quick guide under development that will go in a little bit greater detail. I'm not sure when exactly it will be published, but that will be coming soon. And then the other thing I just really wanted to stress is a lot of times these can get a little involved. And so there is the Econ Planning Suite or the ComPlan Ask a Question. So really you can put a question in there and somebody could not just write a small written request, but also get on the phone with you to sort of walk through things. Joel, did you want to add anything more to that, or?
No, not to that generally, but I think if their question is like, what do we do with this scenario? So I guess, just to go back, you have some options here. So if your data is combining CV with regular CDBG in the CR05 screen, you can leave that data alone if you'd like, and you could discuss that with extra context in the narrative screens. If you prefer, you can pull that data apart, include your own custom table, but then still definitely use the narrative to describe what you're doing, because HUD wouldn't necessarily know that's what you did if you didn't tell them. So it's a little bit of both. So use the narrative field to describe, to provide that extra context to the data and the tables you have. If you know your data is combined, that's a good thing to highlight. Then if you want to pull anything apart, use that custom table. You can use a JPEG of your own Excel sheet if you prefer. I think that rounds that out though. I thought I saw one more about, so for custom table, can a person import data from an Excel file? So the answer is no, not really. What you can do is if you have an Excel file that you like, and it's just on your screen, take a screenshot and you can save it as a JPEG. Then you can upload that image to the CR05 screen. I can go over here. As an example, it would be that add JPEG, but there is no way to directly import an Excel file. If you have space in the administration screen, you could always save that Excel file as a PDF and upload it. But I know you're kind of limited with attachment spaces in the CAPER administration screen. So your best bet might be to just take a screenshot of your Excel and save it up here.
One other comment on the admin screen and the limit for the uploads. You're absolutely right. You are limited in the number of PDFs you can upload. However, what you can do is to take all your related documents for your report and create like an appendice in one PDF that has multiple appendices that are part of it. So you can sort of append everything together into one PDF and then upload that. And that may include multiple tables and different supporting evidence and things that you really want to fill out your CAPER and make it something that's really informative to the public that goes above and beyond our basic requirements for reporting. So
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Robert.
See one here for beneficiary data that gets pulled into the CAPER. Can you confirm whether it only pulls activities that were marked complete by a specific date? So again, the CAPER, whether it gets into general CAPER talk, but also as applies to CDBG-CV, the CAPER reports on the progress made during the program year, the reporting year. So it will typically include any activity that was reported in the activity accomplishment screens if you inserted one for the specific program year. So again, on the accomplishment screens, there's the ability and requirement really to insert accomplishment screens for each program year in which an activity is open. And so if activity accomplishments occurred during a particular program year, in some cases that would be captured and you should report it. So that particularly applies to, say, public service activities where you are able to serve persons during that year. You would report that even if the activity has funds remaining, it continues into next year. Other activities such as a public facility or land acquisition might be something that you wouldn't necessarily report accomplishments so much until a national objective is met. And so that information may be included more only when the activity is completed. So it does depend a little bit on the type of activity and the national objective that you are undertaking.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I got a couple here. I can kind of rapid fire a few of these. So it's asking, are the columns on the add table feature maneuverable? No, they're not. So when you click add table, that's just what you have to work with. You can't resize or reshape those rows or columns. Then this one says, please clarify when you said that on the CR10, both CDBG and CV beneficiary data is combined in that first CDBG column. So we can go look at that real fast. Is this true? The CDBG data would not appear here if your CV funding was set up through the previous con plan cycle. I think I see what they're asking. I think the important thing to keep in mind here, again, is this screen, unlike the CR05, this has nothing to really do with project goal relationships, and it doesn't have anything to do with which con plan cycle you're in. This screen is pulling data directly from your activity accomplishment screens. So this is outside of con plan cycle or project goal relationship. This is completely about at the activity level. So I think that answers that. So that CDBG column is just CDBG plus CDBG-CV for that program year. It doesn't matter the project goal relationship. It doesn't matter what comp plan cycle you're in. Okay, looking through these. John, do you have one that you want?
Yeah, I can do one here. Hopefully I got this. So will continued accomplishment and expenditures up to the 3-year and 6-year spending timeline require CV reporting with every CAPER submitted. If 2020 CAPER is already submitted, can CV spending and accomplishments be submitted with the 2021 CAPER? So yes, you should continue to report accomplishments each CAPER for which the the program is achieving, making accomplishments, and while it's still running and the funds have not all been expended. If the 2020 CAPER is already submitted, can CV spending come? Yes. So again, as I think I kind of said earlier, you're really focusing not so much on what particular action plan, what the action plan year was, but what happened during that particular year that you're reporting on. So if the activities, accomplishments are achieved in the following years, you would continue just to include in the following year's CAPER. You wouldn't go back to the initial CAPER. Now, perhaps you're asking, what if you neglected to report during that program year? That might be something you'd want to, and you realized, oh, you should have, and it's later on. I might talk with your field office in that case to see how they want to handle that, unless Robert or Puping have some input they'd want to put in this case.
Yeah, if that's the question, I recommend you just reach out to your field office rep and discuss your options with them. Ultimately, they're the ones reviewing your CAPER. So,
Thank you. Joel, anything?
Yeah, let's see. I got one here is asking, if you discover an error using the con plan goals and accomplishments report, can you make changes prior to opening up the CAPER template? The answer is yes. So once you make the CAPER, those data connections are in essence kind of frozen. Any changes you make won't get reflected on the CAPER automatically. The CAPER doesn't update dynamically. It's just a template you make at one point in time, and that's the data. If you run the comp plan goals report first, and you see maybe you have a project that's tied to 2 goals, and that was an accident, yes, you could go to that project associated to just 1 goal. I'd advise to give the system 24 hours to update. But then if you were to run the CAPER, it would reflect that new association. So that answer is yes.
Joe, I see 1 or 2 questions related to if your action plan, your reporting year is outside of your original consolidated plan cycle, that say your 2019 action plan amendment was included in your 2015-2019 consolidated plan, and now you're in your 2020 and later consolidated plan. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how that will affect the reporting?
Yeah. So in essence, it's the CRO5 is going to be reflective of this scenario. So that data is just, there's no goal to connect it to in your action plan, because the CAPER is completely goal-oriented, action plan-oriented reporting document. It's not reporting like at the activity level necessarily. It shows you a goal and it shows you the accomplishments that are working towards that goal in your community. So if you run the CAPER and it doesn't have the goal of the accomplishment, it just doesn't have anywhere to put that accomplishment data. So if you're in a 2015 to 2019 con plan cycle, you had your CV funds in that 19 action plan, you're working on your 2020 CAPER, those accomplishments that are related to a CV goal, no matter how you structured it, they're going to come up like they're in scenario 2. So they just won't be attached to a goal. Even if, hypothetically you did attach it to a goal in 2019, because you're in the next con plan cycle, you're going to have to manually include those accomplishments in the CR05. You could use the narrative, you could make a custom table, you could do what Robert said too and make an Excel sheet as a PDF and then just add any tables you want to the CR00 admin screen. But either way, if you're in the next con plan cycle away from your CV funds, then you're in essence going to be in scenario 2 here, and you're going to have to update manually. John, feel free to add if there's more to it.
No, that's good from my perspective.
Okay, this is one that I've gotten a few times through AQ. So which year CAPER are we supposed to report CDBG-CV in? The action plan year in which it was programmed. What if the year's CAPER was 19? Then the last part of the question is, do we need to go back and revise an old CAPER? I'll answer first. I guess I'm not going to let Robert Ping say more, but that answer is no, generally. You don't need to go back. So if you're working on a 2020 CAPER and you have CV accomplishments in your 2020 program year, you don't need to go back and put those accomplishments in a 19 CAPER just so they're associated to a CV tied to that funding stream of that program year. You can just report those 2020 accomplishments in the 2020 program year. Do you see any others, John or Rob?
Or even Robert or Puping, if you see some things that you've seen come in that you'd want to have answered or would like to answer. Some of the ones I'm seeing, maybe similar to ones already asked or be better suited to an AAQ where they're a little bit more specific or may take a little bit more time.
Here's one from Amy. So I think I've gone over this, but this is a good clarifying point. So they're asking to clarify, if you amended your 19 action plan for CV and then began a new con plan cycle in 2020, no CV data will appear in any of our CAPER accomplishments for 2020 to 2024. Right. So if all of your CV projects are in 2019 and you're now in the 2020, like a new con plan cycle, when you make the CAPER template, no CV data will automatically come through to that 2020 CAPER. You're right. Here's one we kind of covered with the CR10. So it's about the discrepancies in the race and ethnicity categories that are available to grantees in the activity screen versus what's in the CR10. That's just how the screen is right now. So I mean, if you capture more specific data in race and ethnicity categories, you should just feel free to use the narrative, or you put in a custom table or an image, or an Excel file as PDF in the admin screen to reflect your own community's progress.
All right, we're coming up on the half hour. It was scheduled to go to the hour, but I think everybody could end their day now if they choose. I do want to say thank you so much, John and Joel and the team at Sitem Group, and Robert and Pupeng. Did you any last words? Any concluding comments from HUD, Robert?
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending the conference and attending this session, and your dedication to reporting and letting the public know how well of a job you're doing combating coronavirus and engaging in community development. And I know that the IDIS templates don't always make it the easiest thing to do. So hopefully this was helpful to overcome those technical challenges and to be able to submit a complete report. So we thank you very much.
Absolutely, and please take advantage of Ask a Question. We're out there and available to work directly with you to resolve any issues you have, or just answer questions. We can shoot you to the where it is on the HUD Exchange. Ton of stuff there. Please take advantage of it. Again, thank you everyone, and this concludes today's webinar.